welcome you here today, obviously on behalf of the Waikato branch of the Korea Veterans Association. I particularly want to acknowledge and welcome our very honoured guest, the Consul General from the Republic of Korea, Mrs. Chang Soon Cha. Welcome. Could we have a round of applause?
First of all, a very warm welcome to all the Korean vets, your wives, your partners, and the widows of our vets that are here today. Also, a special welcome to the friends of this branch who come down from Auckland, face all sorts of difficult journey in terrible weather conditions. So a very warm welcome, and delighted to see you all here from Auckland. Thank you. And also the other vets that have travelled some distance to get here, Bob Longdon from Oklahoma, etc., and all of you from around Hamilton. Tim McIndoe is going to speak to us later after lunch about factors affecting New Zealand and possible effect on New Zealand's economy with the Brexit situation that occurred. Of the events that have occurred in the last month, Brexit is almost of minor upset in comparison with what you've seen of the various assassinations, police shootings, the turmoil in Turkey, and God knows what else that is going on around in the world at the moment. And of course it's all capped off by that comical clown who, God forbid, may be the President of the United States, Donald Trump. I don't know the political persuasions in that area of the United States, but I could imagine nothing worse for the world than to have a fellow like that running the most powerful nation in the world, particularly when he can get his finger on the nuclear button. If you're from Mexico, be very afraid. A mention of Jim Newman. Mark mentioned that he's not here and sends his apologies. A number of years ago, Jim had a surgery requirement for a heart condition. Of recent times, he's been suffering chest pains, etc. He went to the hospital on Thursday, he's been x-rayed, and they found out it's not a heart condition, but he's got fluid on the lungs, which is not good. But however, that will be suitably drained away, and those of you with a macabre sense of humour, you can just imagine that big needle being poked into your lungs. Anyway, we wish Jim well, and we certainly miss him today. Now, the other thing I'll make a brief comment about is the forthcoming AGM being held at 12th, 13th of October in Gisborne. The often quoted phrase, no news is good news, or we've not had any bad news from that area, so everything we assume is on track and all the preparations are underway. And now I will call on Val Cook, who has something very interesting to tell us about, and they are very proud grandparents of their granddaughters, two of them in particular, and one has just recently won an award in the United States. So I'll now ask Val Cook to come and address us all. Thank you very much for all listening.
I'm sorry, I didn't know I had to give this talk today, so this is off the top of my head. I have three granddaughters who went to Korea because my husband served over there because they went to university. The first one, Ashley, our eldest, has been over in Canada, and I'll pass these photos around. She took a photo of the War Memorial at Canada because they were so honoured to have a New Zealander who'd served in Korea, his granddaughter who was over there. Now the other granddaughter is our second to youngest, Holly. She's a lovely girl, and I'm sure you would have loved her. She gave a talk here last year, and she said she'd willingly come back and give a talk to them again. And I'll read this letter she wrote. Dear Gran and Papa, Holly here. I am in Arizona, and the conference in Orizanda was amazing. Veterans are so appreciated over here that at a baseball game, They got all the veterans to stand up and we offered our applaud to their service. The weather is very bitter over here, but I love you all so much. Holly.
I now invite the Consul General from the Republic of Korea to say a few words. Welcome. Could we have a round of applause, please?
It's a deep memory. Mr. Tim McCandle, Member of Parliament, Korean War veterans, and their families, my fellow Koreans in Hamilton. It's my pleasure to be part of your company again. First, I would like to extend my warmest greetings to you all on behalf of the Korean government and Korean community in Hamilton. It has been almost a year since I took up my post as Consul General in Auckland, and I'm extremely blessed to serve here. New Zealand is a great country that offers so much to its visitors. The beautiful nature, tasty food, excellent wine, and most importantly, warm key heart, which we experienced in the Korean War. And I wouldn't be here without your sacrifice landed more than 60 years ago. Your valor and bravery served as a foundation for Koreans to regain hope. You are always our hero. Since your participation in the Korean War, New Zealand has been a friend indeed, as a friend in need. Korea and New Zealand share not only common interests and values such as democracy, peace, and security in the Korean Peninsula, but also common objectives on humanity and international issues as like-minded partners. The Korea-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement also reflects our strong and friendly relationship. Last week, there was a celebration of the school visit scholarship program at St. Paul Collegiate in Hamilton. Over the next 3 years, 150 bright Korean students per year will study in New Zealand under the FTA. This scholarship program is one of the good examples that mirror the two countries' friendship. I hope we continue to strengthen our relationship. Finally, I would like to say how happy I am to see many veterans here today. And thank you for inviting me, and I hope you enjoy today's gathering. Thank you. 감사합니다.
This time she wrote the story on David Menery, and she has to.
I remember this.
Yes, and she has to speak 5 times in America because of the story she wrote on David Menery.
Yeah.
You've been here.
Some of the photos that Mel was just talking about.
Oh, okay. These are the photos.
Sure that these didn't know much about it.
No. And it'll take you over
Never been through that again.
Let me begin, as I say, by making a blindingly obvious statement, and that is that we live in what can only be described as globally very uncertain times. I guess most frighteningly and obviously is the continuing atrocities and terrors inflicted by what you might know as ISIL or Daesh, an appalling international organisation which has no international legitimacy and yet is clearly having an enormous impact on many, many different countries. And we've already had reference to some of the terrible things that have happened, many of which are claimed by ISIL or their forerunners Al-Qaeda, different organisations, but we used to think Al-Qaeda was dreadful. You couldn't have believed that something even worse would come along. But just if you think in the last few days, David has mentioned the turmoil in Turkey. We've had the dreadful truck attack in Nice with 89 dead. Just yesterday came through the news of the shooting in Munich. Earlier we had the Charlie Hebdo killings. In fact, there have been 3 dreadful atrocities of this nature in France, and their country is particularly hard hit. We're all conscious of the fact that the Syrian refugee crisis is something that is almost unimaginable in its scale. And when we sit and think of just how many refugees there are in refugee camps around the world at the moment, and many others who can't even get into the camps, we know that we have a challenge of almost unimaginable proportions. We've seen closer to our own backyard atrocities in Bali and many other countries. I won't go through them all, but I just mention some of those because of the context that I want to speak about. And of course, when we think of what the world can do, we're constantly, as a small country, looking at what New Zealand can contribute. How do we align ourselves? I'm proud of the fact that the New Zealand government has sent training troops to assist with the effort in the Middle East. That, of course, is a controversial decision, but I believe that their efforts are being seen to be making a small difference of the type that we can, but it's also part of New Zealand being seen to be a good ally in the Western Alliance as it tries to stand up to the dreadful threats that we all face. Of course, there's also the dreadful ongoing situation in North Korea, and you are all acutely conscious of that, and therefore, again, I do honour the service that you gave. All of these are challenges that the United Nations and other organisations are trying to deal with, and therefore, it's a matter of pride that here in New Zealand we have a candidate who is, to be hoped, perhaps going to be the next Secretary General of the United Nations. And it might surprise you to hear a national politician say that, but I want to tell you that the New Zealand government is 100% behind Helen Clark in her candidacy. We are giving her every possible assistance and doing all the lobbying we possibly can. And I believe that she is uniquely well qualified to lead that organisation, which is ripe for reform and faces challenges of almost an unprecedented nature. We have now a number of things that face us. One is, and I'm going to focus mainly on trade, the challenge in New Zealand as to how do we cope with what may be to come, and we don't know yet what is to come as a result of Brexit. At the same time, as we've seen our relationship, particularly with China, improve on a trading perspective, so that China and Australia are now our major trading partners, we have at the moment the instability, the uncertainty, potentially the threat of the recent decision at The Hague about China's violation of the South China Sea. We've got our Trade Minister and our Prime Minister doing their level best to negotiate not only within Britain but also with leading figures in Europe to try to ensure that we will be able to develop trading relationships with the EU and separately with Britain. We've got the likelihood that the Chinese will be looking at the recent visit of Joe Biden, the American Vice President, as being potentially provocative. And therefore, what I'm suggesting to you is that a lot of these events, while they may seem unrelated, they are actually all connected, and they are all part of the foreign policy challenges that New Zealand is facing at the moment. I can assure you, as the Senior Whip, whose job it is to approve leave for ministers, that I am approving a lot of leave for Murray McCully at the moment. In fact, the poor man seldom sets foot in New Zealand because he has such a major challenge in his role. And our government faces delicate diplomacy with Europe as Europe adjusts to Brexit. Because potentially there are some countries who will decide as a result of Brexit that here is an opportunity, particularly if they have a heavy dependence on primary production, as we do in New Zealand, that there is an opportunity to sideline New Zealand. Within the EU, and particularly while Britain was in the EU, we had some friends who are happy to help us. Now, of course, we'll have to go it alone without Britain as far as negotiating with the EU is concerned. Make no mistake, that's no easy challenge, and yet it is certainly one that the New Zealand government is determined to pursue. And so, without wishing to be unduly pessimistic, you'd have to say that from New Zealand's perspective, Brexit is not a positive. We just don't know to what extent it's a negative. And I'm sorry if that sounds a little bit of a cop-out, but it could prove to be negative. Only time will tell. But with the ongoing international uncertainty that I've referred to, or as a result of the trade issues that Brexit adds complexity to, the key for New Zealand will be in continuing to do what we have actually managed to do very successfully in recent years, and that is in developing our broader-based trading relationships with many different partners. And Martin, I want to acknowledge the government of which you were a member for the tremendous success of the China Free Trade Agreement. Personally, I'd say that's probably the greatest achievement of the Helen Clark administration, and we are seeing now the huge benefits to New Zealand of that China Free Trade Agreement. Interestingly now, the British are having to discover how to negotiate free trade agreements, because all of their free trade agreements in recent times have been as part of the EU. So, once upon a time, the British were our #1 trading partner. That relationship remains very important to us still, and particularly from a constitutional and historical sense. And I, for one, am very proud of my British heritage. Nevertheless, the good thing is we now have a much more diverse range of trading partners. Our major trading partners now are Australia and China, both of them taking more of our exports than the EU. And regardless of how future events unfold in Europe, New Zealand will continue its discussions with the EU on a possible free trade agreement. We'll take a calm and considered approach to future discussions with a post-Brexit United Kingdom to ensure that the quality and the value of our access to both the EU and the UK markets is retained. So I am optimistic that we can still manage the challenges in front of us well. I'm less certain about how Britain will manage the process. I'm less certain about what the implications are for Europe as a whole, but I am absolutely certain that building a wall is not the answer. And so, David, I do endorse your comments. Surely what we have learned in recent times is you must stand up to aggression. You know that better than anybody. But you must also negotiate with sincerity, with conviction, with firmness, rather than stigmatizing, demonizing, and finding people to blame, and then saying, right, they are the problem, let's deal to them. Yes, we need to do that with ISIL, but we do not need to do that. We do not really need to see that happening within America. And so I have to tell you that I don't think I've ever known a time in my involvement in New Zealand politics when the entire New Zealand Parliament seems to be united around one candidate. And it's going to be a very fascinating outcome.
I would like to pass a sincere message for New Zealand Korea veterans from Korean kids from Korea. But we have a Korean War in June, so she was thinking that teach kids about Korean War. So she tried to find the information, and she found this book, and then this Korean book. So she bought this book for school kids, and then all kids in class, one class study about Korean New Zealand veterans. So they read this book, and then they have a discussion about how you work hard or sacrifice for Korean people. And they start to write a letter to you all. I had this letter from Korea. So all school kids, one from one class, each person choose what they like, the story, and they send they wrote a story, and some kids also draw about yourself and ships and everything. So they want to express thanks to you, New Zealand Korea veteran.
So I really would like to show this to you and also talk to you about how we appreciate to New Zealand Korea veterans. And also this is the evidence of our bright future of Korea and New Zealand and what we have a good relationship between two countries. Kids wrote a letter and wrote, "This is Dave Mannering."
I'm very sorry that you lost your only brother Bob Marchioni here in Korea. There are lots of brave soldiers like your brother, so we can live happily. Your brother's death is not in vain. All my best. Yong Ulcheon.
Suan, thank you for your lovely letter. I really appreciate it, so thank you very much indeed. Good luck. Hair's gone. Indeed.